Yes, you may proceed, Mr. Pretorius.
Chair, during the long adjournment, we gave consideration to the necessity perhaps to clarify one or two issues in regard to matters dealt with before the long adjournment.
Yes.
My apologies, Mr. McBride, if I can take you back, please. The Worksman's report appears at page 1371 of bundle YD, that's exhibit YD. Would you turn to that, please?
I have it, sir.
You will recall, just by way of background to my question which follows, that at all times we've spoken of a provisional or first report signed by Mr. Kuba and a second report signed by yourself, Mrs. Sissoko and Kuba. Is that correct?
Yes.
The second report differed from the first report.
Yes.
Right. Now an analysis of those differences appears at page 1404. Leave aside the additional matters about which Worksman's makes comment as to whether it was necessary or desirable at all. That's a different issue. But at 1404 is analysis of what is referred to as IPID Report 1 and IPID Report 2. Do you see that?
Yes, which is incorrectly titled Deletion of Evidence at paragraph 1, the top of the page.
Yes, no evidence was ever tampered with
No.
or deleted. The evidence always remained in the form of witness statements in the docket.
Absolutely. And perhaps it's instructive from this why they misunderstood what was going on, or that's possible
Yes.
reasonable explanation,
Yes.
because they saw the report and the changes in the report and the omission of certain aspects of the report, the opinion, as evidence.
Right, but in any event, it appears from page 1404 that the statement of Ndaduleni Richard Madilonga had been quoted in the first report.
Yes.
And the quotes from that statement in the second report differed. Correct? And Kuba explains that in his affidavit. I'll come to that in a moment. The same category of observation is made in the report right through to page 1415. Do you see that?
Yes,
From 1404
that's correct.
to 1415. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail. At a particular level, we'll be here for several weeks if we do that.
Yes.
Safe to say that the issue taken by Worksman's appears properly regarded not to be any alteration to evidence, but merely to what Mr. Kuba and Mr. Sissoko thought as relevant quotations to the report. What is your explanation for these quote-unquote changes? Just at a general level.
The changes according to Cooper, as I said earlier, is based on, in terms of his analysis, what was removed was not of evidentiary value and served no real purpose. According to him, for the changes at that stage.
Well, here is the starting point where any inquiry into what the minister had asked Workmen's should have started. In the terms of reference which from the minister to Workmen's, which are quoted in the Workmen's report at page 1375, the first term of reference, which is 5.1, says, your terms of reference in the investigation are the following. 5.1, who and under what circumstances was the original report altered, or how the second report came about with both reports signed by the same person. It seems to me that what follows in 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, and 5.5 is all anchored on whether the original report was altered. Who and under what circumstances was the original report altered? Now, my impression was that if you go to what he refers to as the original report, which is the first report or preliminary report, if you went to the first report prior to the so-called alteration, you would have found it to look in a certain way. If you went to it after the alteration, you would then find that it looked differently, because some sentences maybe had been deleted from it or had been crossed out, or some things had been added to that report by somebody. Now, the evidence that has been given and some of the things seem to suggest that that may not necessarily be correct. Now, can you clear that when there is talk of the alteration of the report, we can see from the terms of reference that the minister's concern was about the alteration of what he calls the original report, which we said is the first report. So forget about this second report. Did the first report physically look different in terms of what it contained after the alleged alteration than it looked before the alleged alteration?
Chair, to answer your question, I think I now understand your earlier question on this issue, which perhaps I didn't answer correctly, or specifically in one of your question. There are a number of reports which start from, perhaps what I'm aware of is 2013, October.
Yes, yeah.
Then it changes in November
Yes.
because things are added and it's sent to Mosing, sent back.
Yes.
By the time it comes to January the 22nd, the so-called first report, it's already had some evolution in it.
Yes.
Because of the discussions between Mosing and Kuba.
Yes.
And
yes.
working together.
Yes, yes.
And presumably acquiring
Yes,
further statements.
yes.
So it would be between Kuba and Mosing,
Yes,
and perhaps Mokongwe.
yes.
It's in a period where Sissoko was forbidden to be part of the process.
Yes.
And it's in a period where I had not arrived yet at IPID. So it's between Kuba, Mosing, and Mokongwe who would know exactly who, and I don't know if they'll be able to recall after so many years who changed what when and the rationale for it. In that report that is now known for sake of convenience as the first report, and I'm not sure what the minister means by the original report in his term of reference.
But in terms of, I mean, you know what the discussions were between yourself and Mr. July during the interview.
Yeah.
At least assuming that what they were talking about reflected what the minister had in mind. When they talked about the alteration as you understood the position, were they talking about a report that contained certain things at a certain time, but after a certain period, those things or some of those things had been altered in that report, as opposed to different views or recommendations being made in another report? In other words, if a report was one page, were they talking on the basis that, look, this report, which is one page, before it had this sentence, it now doesn't have that sentence. Before it had this paragraph, now it doesn't have that paragraph. Before it didn't have this sentence, but it now has a new sentence. That's what I'm trying to establish, whether this reference to alteration, because that's the meaning it gives me, as opposed to a situation where you say somebody has, in a certain report, let us call it in a first report, has expressed certain views. And then in another and later report, he has expressed different views. Now, if you ask me, if a person expresses different views or recommendations in a second and later report, views that are different from the ones he expressed in the first report, that's not altering the report. That's expressing different views in a later report, but for me, that's not altering the first report. I mean, it's true that, it may be true that the effect is that recommendation A, which was in the first report, is no longer the recommendation that stands. But that's not because it's been altered in the first report. It's because it's overwritten by a later report where there is a different view.
Absolutely.
So I'm trying to establish whether, in truth, there was ever any alteration of the first report in the sense that I understand alteration to mean, as opposed to there was simply a change of views, a change of mind on the part of, for example, Mr. Kuba, who might have expressed a certain view before in the first report. In the second report, he associated himself with a different view or recommendation because of new investigation. And then when it came to you and Mr. Sissoko, you had never expressed any view in regard to the first report. You were expressing your views and recommendations for the first time in the second report.
That is correct. An example off the top of my head was that some stuff of the so-called first report would be repeated in the second report, but some qualification added onto it to say this can no longer be the case because we haven't proven X, Y, and Z. For example, I remember a success report. Someone sent a success report to, amongst others, General Dramat. And therefore, from the information that was available then, without the benefit of analysis and review, was that somehow by sending a report to Dramat, he therefore knew something was going on. It later transpired that it's not even clear whether the report was actually sent. There is an electronic copy on someone's computer, but whether it was actually sent or not is not known. Whether it was actually received and whether it was actually read, and whether, if he had knowledge of it, was of any consequence at all, of the arrest. The success report is to the arrest.
But to go back to my question, is it your understanding that what was in issue was never really about anybody going to the so-called first report and changing sentences and crossing out some things and adding some things into that report as such, as far as you recall? What was in issue was that in the second report, in the final report, views were expressed or recommendations were made that differed from the views and the recommendations made in the first report. Is that your understanding of what the whole issue was about?
For me, my understanding is that there was a change at all to the first report, and that anything
I'm sorry,
was
just
changed.
repeat that sentence. Just repeat that sentence. Your view is that there was a change or no change?
The obsession with Werksman, the minister, and all the advisors was that there was a change of the first report. And they elevated the first report to a status which logically it could not enjoy, and that it was inviolable, can never change under any circumstances.
Yes, but hang on, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Your understanding that, one, nobody could talk about you or Mr. Sissoko having changed your views or recommendations about anything because you never participated in the first report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You
yes.
never participated, you had no role to play in the first report.
Absolutely none.
To the extent that anybody could talk about a change of recommendation or anybody changing his view or a view, that would only apply to Mr. Kuba, because in the first report he had expressed certain recommendations. Those recommendations were different from the recommendations made in the second report, which he co-signed.
That's correct, yes.
That's correct. So I'm trying to establish whether this whole thing was about why did Mr. Kuba change his view that these people must be prosecuted? Was it about why did he change his view? Or was it about why did he go to the first report physically and cross out certain sentences or paragraphs or add things that were not there physically?
From the evidence and from the affidavits and from engagement, Mr. Kuba is on record as saying he sent a draft at some stage in 2014 to Mr. Sissoko's computer. And it is on that draft, whatever it was, whether it was the same, a correspondent to the first report or not, they worked on that draft. And that's where there were changes. I would say that the second report is perhaps an enhancement on the facts or emphasis that was contained in the first report. So that's all I can say. I'm not sure what transpired to give rise to the existence of the first report and whatever changes took place there. And what was in the first report at the stage when I co-signed with Kuba and Sissoko, the now known as second report.
You don't know?
I don't know.
Yes, Mr. Pretorius.
Well, perhaps, and without any presumption, what the DCJ is putting to is this. The first report was always there, on file.
Yeah.
No one took that first report, added, deleted, changed the recommendation, threw the original first report away, and put the second report on file. Two reports were always on file. One in one form, the other in the other form.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, when the minister requested all of this information, both reports were given to the minister. So there was no attempt to mislead the minister by only showing one report. Both reports are with the bundle that was sealed and given to the minister on 26th of November, 2014.
And what appears to have escaped perhaps the minister's attention and Worksman's attention is the fundamental issue you raised with the first report, that it was largely the product of the crime intelligence investigation.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so that first report, far from being incapable of alteration or supplementation or being subjected to another view, it's arguable that no regard should have been had to it and you should have started again.
Which, Chair, is indeed what Kuba proceeded to do, to review everything that was there at that stage and the relative evidentiary value. The way it can never stand up in court now that all the facts are, it could never ever, based on of the shenanigans that took place before it arrived at IPID, in any event.
If necessary, the report may be subject to further analysis and debate, but just to highlight the approach of Mr. Kuba, it appears at 1236 of Exhibit YC. You've testified that Kuba was doing an investigation into the Rendition saga under the supervision of Mr. Mo Singh, Advocate Mo Singh of the NPA.
That's correct, yes.
And Kuba had inherited the docket, for want of a better word, from crime intelligence.
That's correct, yes.
Kuba had a number of concerns which he highlights in his affidavit. But in paragraph 19 on page 1236, he says, while I conveyed these concerns to Mo Singh, he told me that I must nevertheless sign the January 2014 report and send it to him as the investigation had been going on for too long. He states elsewhere that he was under pressure from the NPA to produce the report.
That's correct.
Leave aside whether that also interferes with the independence of IPID or not. His explanation is summarized in paragraph 20. He says, I firmly deny that there was any improper motive on my part, Sissoko or McBride, in the changes that were made to the Rendition's investigation report in March 2014. He also is caught up in the in the use of language that refers to changes in a report rather than the production of a second report. He said, "There was no attempt on our part to exclude any material evidence from the report. The changes were made to reflect what we considered to be credible evidence that would withstand scrutiny in court." Is that your understanding?
That's correct, yes.
In paragraph 23 over the page, 1237, he says, "In finalizing the report and presenting the final report to McBride for authorization, we sought to conduct a thorough, critical and objective review of the totality of the evidence and to present only recommendations that were supported by credible evidence." That's his explanation. He will come here to tell the chair about that.
That's
But as
correct.
far as you're aware, that was the correct approach.
That's correct, Chair.
In any event, to just make clear what Worksman's found, at page 1427, at paragraph 5.1.5, they find, "In the absence of a valid explanation for the deletions by the co-signatories, the only logical conclusion which can be drawn from the circumstances detailed above is that the second report was created for the purpose of exonerating the high-ranking officials, specifically Dramat and Sabir, who were implicated in the first report." The implication, and that's Exhibit YD, page 1427, in paragraph 5.1.5, is somehow that evidence was created or fabricated for an ulterior motive. Was that ever put to you?
No.
The reference to deletion there, would it be more accurate to say they are actually talking about a failure to include in the final report something that was in the first report, as opposed to deleting something that is in a certain document, on your understanding?
On my understanding, it would be a conscious decision not to include, after review, anything that was of no evidentiary value. And if somehow non-evidentiary value quotations crept in initially, there was a conscious decision not to include them. But in any event, whatever was there in the first report was known because it was included with the package given to Minister Nhlego. And there was no attempt to hide anything or remove it for ulterior motives or anything like that. I can't take it much further than that, yeah.
Well, it may well be that if you have got a hard copy of the first report, but you have got the same report in electronic form, and in preparing the second report, you use the electronic version of the same report, and then what you want to include in the final report, you delete some things. And maybe that's the deletion they are talking about, deleting what is in the electronic form, as opposed to deleting what's in the hard copy.
Chair, the way you put it now would be accurate, is what I expect would have happened. I do not expect that it would have started a report from scratch when there are some objective facts that don't affect it either way.
Yeah.
So they would have cut and pasted.
Yes, yes. But the difference, of course, would be this, that as long as the hard copy, if there was a hard copy, I assume there was a hard copy that had been given to the NPA, if that hard copy remained as it was, it represented what had been given and it had not been interfered with, and what you had produced by copying and pasting, if you want, was another report. But that hard copy still stood as it was before.
Yes. And just to take it further, to show that there wasn't any untoward motive. The case, in all its facets, was discussed with Mr. Ngasana. The pros and cons, and suppositions and scenarios, and different aspects. And the consensus in discussion with him is that you cannot sustain a case on Dramat and Sibia. It's just impossible. And all possible angles were covered. Now, I note in the Werksman report, they take issue that Mr. Ngasana refused to speak to Werksman. My view is that Mr. Ngasana was right. He was protecting the independence of the prosecuting authority. And as to why Mr. July will take offense to that and basically suggests Ngasana was the only one who could do something, and therefore some disciplinary processes must take place on this issue, indicates a clear lack of understanding of, and for the Minister of Police to suggest decisions taken by the NPA are his business at all. I don't know if we can blame that on lack of knowledge of the importance of the Constitution and constitutional democracy and independence of institutions, or whether it was a willful ignoring of what are the principles that underpin this democracy. I don't know.
Let's perhaps change the focus of the debate to a higher level, and I don't mean any adverse judgment on the debate that's taken place, but what you deal with now is in fact what happened as a result of the whole rendition saga and the manner in which it was handled. Leave aside whether it was dealt with properly or not, you've given your evidence. But you now tell the chair of the outcome, the demise of certain officials, the changes in personnel in the IPID, and of other consequences that occurred as a result of the manner in which the rendition saga was handled. Firstly, let's go to paragraph 50. What post did Mr. Sesoko hold prior to his suspension as a result of the rendition's investigation?
Thanks, Chair. He was the National Head of Investigations, or as we say, Chief Director of Investigations and Information Management. He was the head of all investigations conducted by IPID.
Did he support your application to challenge the constitutionality of certain sections of the IPID Act and other sections when you challenged your suspension?
That's correct. He supplied a confirmatory affidavit or supporting affidavit.
When was he suspended? Do you recall?
A few weeks after he had supplied the supporting affidavit.
And he was also charged with altering what we now refer to as the first report. Is that correct?
No, I've never mentioned Mr. Sissoko in circumstances of the first report.
4 and 5 of paragraph 50 of your statement.
Yeah.
Remember that Worksman's made a recommendation that you and Sissoko,
And
as well as Kuba, be charged because they didn't know who did what.
Yeah, so, yeah, but the way you phrased it, he was altering the first report, which we...
Yes, now I don't want to get caught in the same terminology and to give any validity to the substance of the charge.
Yeah.
But what was the nature of the charge against Mr. Sissoko?
He was charged with altering the report.
Right.
Yes.
Leave aside whether that charge was properly formulated in the light of the evidence and questions that have now transpired in your evidence here. That was the nature of the charge, correct? In fact, the charge reflected the views of Worksmans and the Minister in relation
Yes,
to the fact that there was one report, that was the final report, and you couldn't actually do
That's
anything
correct.
about that
That's
through
correct.
later investigation or analysis. Correct?
That's correct, yes.
Who came in as the acting executive director under your suspension?
It was Mr. Khamanyani.
To your knowledge, what did he do as soon as he took office? You deal with this in paragraph 50.
He asked for a number of cases, including the Panday case. He also inquired from Mr. Sissoko about the cases involving Ntlemeza and General Mabula.
All right. Now, before you go on,
Yeah.
tell the chair briefly, there will be evidence
Yes.
to follow your evidence.
Yes.
But very, very briefly, what was the Panday case all about?
Panday case involved corruption relating to the 2010 World Cup, in which a number of police officers were in a corrupt relationship with a businessman in Durban, and police officers also involved the provincial commissioner.
Right. Now, that case, was it investigated by IPID?
It initially was investigated by DPCI.
General Boyson.
General Boyson. At some stage, we received a complaint from General Boyson about interference in the case. I think it could have been around about 2014, October, November, when we received the complaint.
Right. And did IPID then do some work in relation to the case?
Yeah, IPID did work right until the time I was suspended, and until the time that Sissoko and Kuba were suspended.
Right.
Yeah.
You tell the chair that your successor or acting successor called for that file or case.
Yes, that's correct.
We will deal with that in more detail, but was that case ever put on the court roll for prosecution?
To my knowledge, there was one appearance on one of the cases. There were about 4 cases related to Panday. But the one which we worked on together with the National Prosecuting Authority in preparation for trial was a very simple one. It was a one relating to bribery, and all accompanying evidence was made available, and Advocate Gerinel was appointed to prosecute the case by Mr. Nlasana. And the case was supposed to be enrolled, and in fairness, there was a request at some stage, I'm not sure for which particular case, that the accused make representations on the bribery case, because The decision was that the bribery case is quite clear-cut. And if the bribery case is successfully prosecuted, the question is therefore begged, what was the bribery about? Which should automatically lead to the bigger corruption that was taking place.
Involving police officials.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Just before we continue, you have told the chair that the case file was requested by your acting successor, Mr. Khamanyani,
Yes.
and that, as I understand your evidence, there has not been a successful prosecution, despite your view that there is evidence on file.
Yes.
Right.
There's been no successful prosecution, or there has been no prosecution at all? Or what is the position?
There's been no prosecution on the bribery case yet.
On the bribery case,
Yes.
there's been no prosecution.
Yes. On one of the other prosecution cases, Chair, on one of the other corruption cases, there was one appearance at some
Appearance,
stage.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Could we put it another way? No case involving the issues to which you've just referred has been finalized.
Absolutely not.
And then you referred to other IPID investigation files that were requested. And you mentioned Major General Mabula and is it General Ntlemeza?
Yeah. The one of Ntlemeza, Mr. Khamanyane traveled to Limpopo. Mr. Kuba was already suspended. Mr. Khamanyane called Mr. Kuba back from suspension to discuss the Ntlemeza case that IPID had begun investigating. In relation to General Mabula case, which involved the death of a suspect in custody, and by the evidence that was available, it involved torture. Mr. Khamanyane requested documentation about that case from Mr. Sissoko. On my return to the office,
After your suspension?
after my suspension, an important piece of information which had been given to the provincial head of Northwest, of IPID, went missing, could not be located. It was a recording of a conversation where a suspect admitted involvement in the torture which led to the death of a suspect, which, against the background of these changes, it was very strange. Fortunately, a copy was kept of it. So the case was then resuscitated upon my return, and all the evidence and dockets and evidence put together, because there was some trick in the way the case was reported also.
Who was the official within IPID who was dealing with all these cases, Pandey and Ntlemeza, Mabula, and the like?
Before his suspension, it was Mr. Sissoko ultimately
Right.
that would be in charge.
We get now, at least notionally, to paragraph 51 of your statement, but I don't want to deal with it now. I need to intervene, Chair, to deal with a matter that has received considerable publicity and to clarify from our point of view what we understand the position to be, notwithstanding what has appeared in the press. To take a step back, Mr. McBride made certain comments in his statement in regard to the findings of your younger brother, Advocate Nkolisi Zondo, in relation to the disciplinary hearing of Mr. Sissoko. Not his disciplinary hearing, Mr. Sissoko.
Yes.
In his statement, Mr. McBride expresses a very narrow opinion of what occurred at that inquiry in relation to sick notes submitted to Advocate Zondo on Mr. Sissoko's behalf, and whether these should or should not be taken into account. There's an opinion expressed. When this matter was raised before you at the beginning, it was stressed to you that there's a record, that the record is complete and comprehensive. The record involves not Mr. McBride, but another witness, and any assessment of that record can in due course be made by whomever might be appropriate. In relation to those circumstances, really what Mr. McBride can or cannot say amounts to no more than an opinion and doesn't really count for anything other than Mr. McBride's view. Presented to you was a comprehensive piece of research and documentation prepared on behalf of the legal team. That was the only written submission you had before you. It was placed before you and never detracted from, because I recall saying at the very end that when this matter comes to be considered finally, we will deal with the issues, and the report presented to you, or the submissions presented to you rather, would remain intact and relevant. And as I understand it, you accepted that at some stage you would reconsider or consider all those elements in that report or those submissions placed before you on behalf of the legal team. Now, in order to allow the evidence to proceed, I intervened to say, well, it's an opinion. It's no more than opinion. You could hear that, and in due course, you could make a decision in regard to your attitude towards this and other evidence, and that was where it rested. I might have said I was speaking on behalf of the legal team. I did say that all the views were not
I don't
unanimous.
think you said you were speaking on behalf of the legal team. I think you said the views expressed in the document that you put up were not unanimous.
Yes, that's what I said.
Yeah.
And I took it upon myself to offer a way through. I didn't purport to change what the legal team had said.
Yes,
in fact,
yes.
it remained extant before you, and I think you understood it.
Well,
that way.
it remains before me.
Yes.
It's available to me to read. I have before that I had a look at least parts of it, and you did say it's not unanimous, and you did.
Yes. I offered.
Whatever you said is on record.
Yes, but I did offer a way forward for which I take full responsibility.
Yes,
and that was because of the nature
Yeah.
and extent of the evidence, because there's a full and comprehensive record.
Yeah.
It's not necessary for you to make any final decision now. You can make a decision later. And to hear the opinion of an individual who was not directly involved on a factual basis would not detract from any decision that you might make in the future. But the situation has now become more complicated, Chair.
Okay.
We learned
maybe before you tell us about the situation becoming more complicated, I must just repeat that what I said was maybe let's not have a situation where we adjourn Mr. McBride's evidence because the Commission doesn't have a lot of time. Let me hear his evidence. But I did indicate that probably the way forward should include that submissions be invited from legal professional bodies. I may have mentioned one or two other people or institutions, to make submissions before any decision can be made as to what should happen with regard to any evidence that might relate to my younger brother. And my plan is still that unless something else happens, my plan is still that I should invite certain legal professional bodies. I haven't finalized in my own mind who else, to make submissions so that at a certain stage I can then, if need be, make a decision whether what should be done.
Yes.
You know, it's an unusual situation because if I was sitting in court as a judge, it may have been very easy. But I'm sitting here as chairperson of the commission, and to make things more complicated, the commission wasn't appointed in the usual way in which commissions are appointed. There was a remedial action from the public protector who made certain prescriptions. There was a High Court decision which gave effect to the public protector's remedial action as to the selection of the person to chair the commission. So all of those things will need to be looked at so that if I am the one who must make the decision as to what should happen to it, I make it with the benefit of submissions from different, bodies.
Yes,
I don't know whether it's a matter which I think there was a reference to a possibility that I think it's in the memo or note that was written that we talked about earlier. There was a reference to the possibility that maybe the president could be asked to amend the terms of reference
or the regulations.
Or the regulations. So there are all kinds of things, and certainly if I'm the one who must make the decision, I would like the benefit of different submissions from professional bodies. So, but I certainly accept that the note that you put up is there. It's available to me to read in full.
So, Chair, before we get to the complication, in the light of the various press reports, all of which I've not read and may not be accurate, just to summarize, McBride originally intended to express an opinion on someone else's disciplinary inquiry and the circumstances prevailing in that inquiry, that there is a written record upon which any informed judgment can be made in due course. That's not before you, save perhaps in some annexure where the ruling of Mr. Zondo exists, that in order not to delay proceedings unduly, it was decided as an interim measure, and pending any decision you make, after hearing representations not only from other professional bodies but also from the President's office you mentioned.
Yes, I mentioned,
you would make a final decision, and that it would not affect that process if you merely had reference or heard the opinion in relation to those facts of Mr. McBride. But the situation has now been, and also the submissions of the legal team remain before you for your consideration, unaltered, and those were the only written submissions before you. The situation has become a little more complex now because we were informed this weekend, Chair, that Mr. Boyson also wishes to make reference to an inquiry in which Mr. Zondo presided,
Yes.
over which Mr. Zondo provided, involved or may not have continued. I don't know the full facts and the extent to which the inquiry continued or didn't continue, but it involved General Boyson himself,
Okay.
so it's direct.
Yes.
And Mr. Sissoko may come to give evidence. Again, he will give evidence which is direct,
Yes.
as opposed to opinion. In the light of that, and I've discussed it with Mr. McBride, perhaps everything, opinion and everything else, should be pending
Until
a full consideration of all the evidence together to see what to do. Because I would imagine that the evidence of Mr. Sissoko, which is direct, and the evidence of General Boyson, which is also direct, will be decisive of this issue rather than what Mr. McBride might or might not have to say. And Mr. McBride is quite willing, I understand, and he can confirm it, to pen his evidence in relation to paragraph 51 of his statement until further notice.
I would be inclined to say, let's get more information if General Boyson has something to say as well. Let's hear what he has to say before any decision can be made. And if Mr. McBride is happy to pen that part of his evidence, there is no problem. Mr. McBride, do you confirm? What's your position?
Yes, I have no objection.
Okay.
So
okay,
just
thank you.
for clarity's sake, because one doesn't know how this will be understood
Yes.
by the media, there was little prejudice to the overall process still to be considered by yourself by hearing the opinion indirectly of Mr. McBride. We have subsequently learnt that there are at least two pieces of direct evidence that deal with the same matter, which really overtakes the consideration of Mr. McBride, and in relation to that, it requires full and comprehensive consideration for a decision by yourself on the strength of, amongst other things, the submission the legal teams have made to you.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I think that is the way to go, because assume that the decision was to say, well, if one looks at what Mr. McBride has to say about Mr. Mxolisi Zondo in regard to Mr. Sisoko's disciplinary hearing, if one were to say, when one has regard to the nature of what he has to say, in the scheme of everything, I should hear it, then there would be a problem if later on General Boyson or somebody else comes up with something else. So it
Correct.
might be better to say, because if in the end the decision would be in the light of what General Boyson may say, in the light of what someone else may say, I should not hear it, then I may as well not hear the part of it that comes from Mr. McBride. So it's more convenient to say, let's see exactly what's in what every witness comes up with.
Yes. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. But there is no evidence that should be heard that will not be heard. It's a question of who must hear it. if it's evidence that should be heard, it should be heard. It's a question
It
of
will indeed
who
be
should-
heard in the form, manner, and by the person
Yes.
that ultimately is decided,
Yes.
at least under your initial direction.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe
yeah.
that the person
Yeah.
who finally hears it is appointed by someone else.
Yeah.
If that's possible at all. It's a
Yes.
complex.
It's a very complex
matter.
matter. I think I've had time to reflect on it. It is complex because in terms of, not just the terms of reference, in terms of a High Court decision giving effect to the public protector's remedial action, evidence relating to matters that fall under the terms of reference as they stand, they need to be heard by this commission. There is a question if now it's somebody else, is it still being heard by this commission
Yes.
if it's being heard by somebody else? But at the same time, there may be situations where, however you look at it, I shouldn't hear certain evidence. I don't know. I know that in the Constitutional Court, we have dealt with matters even where a colleague of ours is involved, and we deal with them, and we deal with them in the best way we can. But it's not always the best situation. So it's not an easy matter. It's a matter that needs proper submissions to be made, so that in the end there can be nobody suggesting that any evidence that should have been evaluated in a certain way wasn't evaluated in a certain way, in a proper way, or evidence was heard by somebody who should not have heard it. So we need to look at everything properly.
To be fair to all concerned, particularly yourself, Chair, to have heard the contents of paragraph 51, the opinion there would not have affected any final decision that you might have made. The situation is now different,
Yes.
where there
Yes.
is further direct evidence
Yeah.
that requires a fresh approach to the problem.
Yes, yes, no,
And
that's
for that purpose, you have the submissions of
Yeah.
the legal team, and any further submissions that the legal team might make,
Yes.
plus submissions of outside
yes.
bodies, including the presidency.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Paragraph 52, Mr. McBride, you say that Sissoko also faced criminal charges together with Mr. Kuba and yourself
That's correct.
for fraud and defeating the ends of justice.
That's correct.
And you've already said that those criminal charges were withdrawn on the 1st of November 2016.
That's correct, Chair.
You then returned to office.
That's correct.
What happened to Mr. Sissoko?
Mr. Sissoko had taken the matter to the Labour Court or the Bargaining Council. I can't remember precisely, but in the process and in the absence of a handover report by Khamanyane, the reasons given for his dismissal and the decision to discipline him were not available. In addition to that, there was no basis for IPID as an organization, never mind myself, to actually oppose any action that Sissoko sought for redress on his situation. As such, a department had to settle with Mr. Sissoko's legal team, which resulted in his return to IPID.
All right. You say at paragraph 53, Mr. McBride, on page 11 of your statement, 11 of exhibit YA, that you made a certain discovery or observation on your return to office in relation to the statistical performance of IPID as it had been reported in your absence. What is your evidence in that regard?
Yeah, it was brought to my attention by Mr. Sissoko and the team that the Auditor General had also queried a number of issues relating to the way in which cases were closed. One particular case, which is quite strange and stark, was a case of a complaint that was laid in my absence against General Patlane. And at some stage, a duplicate of the same case made under a different case number in the IPID case control system was made. And subsequently, both cases were closed because they were duplicates of each other.
Yes, just to illustrate the point, you have one case,
Yes.
docket, investigating a particular police official.
That's correct, yes.
You have a duplicate file implicating the same person on the same investigation.
That's correct, yes.
So the two are, in essence, copies of each other.
That's correct.
The one is withdrawn because it has a duplicate,
That's correct.
and the other is also withdrawn because it had a duplicate.
Yes.
So both disappear.
So in the IPID system, both cases are closed.
But you deal with that later in your evidence. To deal with the general point you make in paragraph 53, how was the performance of IPID in your absence reported, including to Parliament?
Thanks, Chair. For us, it was reported that IPID's performance had gone up since the appointment, well, since the suspension of the Executive Director and the appointment of an acting Executive Director. And
Was this accurate?
no, it was not accurate, and it was untrue. And the manipulation of statistics and the closing of cases under a provision which is called special closure is what was utilized to come to that conclusion. It's important to add that there was a criminal case opened up on this matter and disciplinaries which resulted in one person being dismissed and another very senior person who was responsible resigning from IPID.
So in summary, in your absence, after the change of leadership
Yes.
in IPID, it was reported, you say falsely, that the performance had improved. This was a device that was used, or there was a device used to manipulate statistics to achieve an apparent result which was not an accurate result.
Yes. And the practice was quite widespread across provinces, and an instruction had been given at some stage. The exact nature of the instruction, Mr. Sissoko could attest to, but it also occurred within, for example, KZN, I'm aware of, and Gauteng, just from the reports that were coming in and from memory. So it wasn't an isolated case. There was a number of cases on special closure. In fact, that loophole in definition, we were then forced the following financial year to change the definition of what a completed case is and how it is handled. If I remember correct, that also resulted in a new standard operating procedure,
All right.
which was then signed.
Okay. In summary, what has happened is that the leadership of a law enforcement agency institution or a government institution is removed and replaced by other leadership. It is then reported that under the new leadership, performance has improved. Is this occurrence unique to IPID at around the time?
No, Chair. In the period, General Ntlemeza indicated that performance of DPCI had gone up after General Dramat's removal, and he'd been appointed to that position. Similarly, in SARS, the then Commissioner Moyani made the same comment that performance and collection in SARS has gone up.
The Chair will in due course consider all evidence placed before him and make a finding in relation to whether these are coincidences or whether there was a design behind them. Let's go on with your statement. Tell the Chair, please, what the fate of Mr. Kuba was. Was he also suspended on the 21st of May 2015?
That is correct. Mr. Kuba was suspended, and then, as we've covered already, Mr. Kuba did a plea bargain with the department.
Before you go there, we will deal with that in due course in the following paragraph. But just to complete what you say in paragraph 55, if we may, the reasons for his suspension, I understand, were the same as the reasons for your suspension and Mr. Sisoko's suspension.
That's correct, Chair.
Dealing with the rendition report.
That's correct.
Did he also submit an affidavit on your behalf in your court challenge to your suspension?
Indeed he did, yes.
Then in paragraph 56, you refer to certain events that took place before his dismissal which followed.
Yes.
Tell the Chair about that, please.
Yeah, so some of the stuff, Chair, I had covered earlier when discussing my engagement with Werksbank, and that I had raised some of these concerns. But after 6 months of suspension, Mr. Kuba reached a plea bargain agreement to the department. He would admit non-specific wrongdoing on a Wednesday, and the following Monday he'd be back at work. Kuba explains that in one of his affidavits somewhere as to what pressures were on him and why he needed to come to that plea bargain. In any event, he did the plea bargain. He was told to report back for duty on Monday. He then made an affidavit on the Friday. In that affidavit, he covers his plea bargain, his reasons, and that in his affidavit he did not infer any guilt or implication to McBride and Sissoko. He then arrives at work on Monday. On Monday, he gets a call from Mr. Khamanyani to tell him that he should give him within 24 hours reasons why he should not be dismissed. because his plea bargain and his affidavit on the Friday, that is between the Wednesday and the Friday, are in contradiction to each other. And I think Mr. Kuba made some written representation. In any event, Tuesday morning he was dismissed without a hearing or any further explanation.
The emphasis in paragraph 56 of your statement, Mr. McBride, is somewhat different, where you say he was dismissed after he refused to falsely implicate yourself and Sissoko, and upon his refusal he was dismissed with immediate effect. I understand you to say now that no, the real reason for his dismissal was a contradiction between the contents of his plea bargain and his supporting affidavit.
Chair, I purposefully answered like the way in which I did, and it's not different to what is there, and I'll explain to you why, and then when Mr. Kuba can testify for himself. When he signed the plea bargain, what he was agreeing that he had done wrong, he just admitted he was doing wrong. Separate from his signature on the plea bargain, a set of charges was added onto him with allegations onto the paper, which was not what he had signed. And this was done in the presence of the advocate, but Kuba says he was not aware of that attachment, and that's why I answered. But the discussions with Khamanyani was that why does he say he did wrong, but he doesn't go further and say McBride and Sissoko did wrong. So indeed the last sentence, or the last two sentences, within a week Kuba was summarily dismissed after he refused to falsely implicate me and Sissoko. And it follows up what's in 57, because 57 then goes into detail how the same attempt to get him to falsely implicate us continues after he's now dismissed and sitting at home.
Let's deal with 57 then. Thank you.
Thanks. So after Mr. Kuba is dismissed, he was approached by officers from DPCI and promised his job back on condition he made a false statement saying that I had forced him to change the rendition report. He was visited over a period of a number of days on this occasion, and on the last day of those series of visits, he recorded a phone call after these visits had taken place of one of the people who had visited him. And the recording is with the commission, and so is the transcript of the recording. And in the recording, Kuba is then informed by a Colonel Mahlangu that General Ntlameza won't forget him. If he says what was discussed, he will be restored to his position, and that the general is his friend and won't leave him and won't dump him. And the general, in the context, according to Kuba, is General Ntlameza. So the point of 57 is that Kuba is dismissed unfairly in a very unprocedural way. Whilst he's sitting at his home, he's not left alone. They come to and offer him his job back to be restored. They come right into his house, but he must do X, Y, and Z, which includes implicating in their words, and it's on the recording,
But before we go on, with the leave of the chair, we want to play the recording, if we may. It's very brief.
Yes.
It is a transcript.
Yes, I think that, let's do that. Let's do that.
May I just say, and ask the witness, the recording is an isolated communication that happened after a series of communications. A series of visits, you say?
That's correct, yes.
In fact, according to, if Mr. Kuba does give evidence, and according to your evidence, Colonel Mahlangu visited Kuba on a number of occasions.
That's correct.
And this telephone call is the last or one of the last in the series of communications, whether personal interactions or telephonic.
That's correct.
The point I wish to make is that one can only understand the full import of the transcript and the telephonic recording if one understands all that preceded it.
Absolutely, Chair.
So, and you will point this out to the chair after hearing the recording.
Okay.
The recording has been transcribed. I'm told, not instructed, Chair, I'm told accurately.
Yes.
And it's in bundle D, exhibit YD at page 1456.
Yes, but for now, you will play the recording. Mr. Pretorius.
Sorry, Chair, do you have a question?
It's okay, it's taken over. It's been overtaken.
No, I'm not.
Sorry, hold it. I'm sorry, Chair.
Okay, no, it's been overtaken by events. It's okay. Okay, all right. Let's hear the recording.
Hello, Mr. Fago. No, I'm not sleeping. Mr. Fago.
Wakati wa stara phone akamkhalas.
Oh, Kima. This story like man.
Our story lemus not one and little like a mofo.
Oh, hey, Brigadier, how are you?
Musha, Pumana.
Oh, thanks. Give Mr. Fago, man.
Yeah, I didn't. I get go to Chesuya.
No, Kisha, please, I'm
No, I get so physical high, Marakimo, Mokekulumo.
Oh, okay.
Multi-classing, multi-more high, how do you more to? Then get a multi-to William Assessor, Moyanian, okay.
Okay, no, that's good.
Yeah.
I know, man, thanks, man. I think I'll Brigadier, maybe tomorrow. We finalize appointment here. I am here. Monday.
Yeah, Neki, the wants something.
Okay.
Yeah, Neki wants something, or we to everything you do for good for yourself.
Oh, okay.
General, I get general like it to me how.
Hey.
I get a general to me how.
Yeah, no, get me out.
You must understand, or whatever you do good for yourself,
Hey.
not to support your enemy,
Hey.
will make him and will empower him to ensure that when you restore your job. That is what you must do.
Okay.
Whatever, everything of good we get it on,
Okay.
and also be in line with your enemy.
Yeah.
As soon as everything is finalized, General is the one who will do good for you.
Okay.
As a friend, as a person you know,
Yeah.
I don't think he will dump you. I don't think he will throw you in the mud. The only thing is be honest with yourself. Look, you say everything. discuss the wrong ideas and advices, and then general NPA batla dila ka whoever ba dila le na mara general tamolelo no, since this guy who pushed to gore fihle mo le moteng as the witness, then he is acquitted.
Okay.
And something has to be done. He has to be restored back to his position or to his duty.
Okay.
Yeah. You must underline it. You must put NB and underline it. Uske wa yet.
Okay.
Uske wa highlight highlight. We highlight red pen. It's the best statement you must empower yourself with.
Okay.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
no problem. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Hello, Mr. Papa.
Hey, Usaru.
I'm informed, Chair, of two things. Setswana? I'm not a linguistic expert, Chair, by any means, but I'm informed that the languages used are a combination of Setswana, Sesotho, and perhaps Sepedi as well. And I'm also informed that...
Well.
I'm sorry, Chair?
Some English as well.
Some English, yes. Yeah. That I did understand. Chair, I'm also informed that the transcript is an accurate transcript. That may be subject to debate in the future, but perhaps we should have it officially transcribed in due course. But for the moment, my information is that it's safe to proceed on the basis of the translation contained at page 1459 in Exhibit YD.
1459.
Well, 1458 it begins, but the parts that we will seek to place on record are at page 1459 and following.
Yes.
But let's just place this telephone conversation in its proper context, please, Mr.
Well, before we do that, let's talk about how far we will go today. It appears to me, subject to you and Mr. McBride being agreeable, so that we should try and not finish before 5. What's your attitude? I know you have been standing there for a long time.
Chair, if we can continue to 5, that may help, but I'm not sure in the end it will make much difference, because in any event we won't finish today and we're in for tomorrow as well.
Yes.
So whether we finish at 4 or 5,
Yeah.
I don't think makes a material difference ultimately, because as discussed with you over the long adjournment, it's unlikely that we should call the next witness, who's also a witness whose evidence is of some length.
Yeah.
So
the only thing, of course, is that if we add more time today, we enhance our prospects of finishing tomorrow with him, and maybe even earlier than later than would be the case if we don't add more time. That's the only consideration.
Yeah, that's entirely in order, Chair. Thank you. If we may just take a break at some stage between now and 5.
Yeah, I think after finalizing what we'll do beyond, whether we'll proceed to 5, then we can take the break and then resume.
Well, I thought that we had reached, quote and unquote, an agreement on the issue, Chair, that we would proceed today till 5.
Well, I haven't asked Mr. McBride
Sorry.
Mr. McBride, what's your situation about proceeding to 5 o'clock?
I'd prefer if we didn't have to.
Or if we didn't have to, but you remain available tomorrow?
Yes. In addition, Chair, there's aspect in terms of the first affidavit which I signed,
Yes.
which we haven't consulted on yet,
Yes.
and which means it's unlikely even tomorrow
Yes.
that we will finish.
Yes.
And it is quite important, but I haven't discussed it with Mr. Advocate Pretorius yet.
Yes.
But I am, in the back of my mind, it's there, and
Yeah.
it has been submitted last year to the
Yeah.
commission. Yes.
Well, but if we finished at 4:30, then you would be fine?
It wouldn't
It would not
inconvenience me.
inconvenience you. Okay. Well, I'm trying to strike a balance between finishing at 4 and 5. But 4:30 is fine with you?
Yes, Chair.
Yes. Okay, no, that's fine. I think let's take a break now rather than later. It's about 26 minutes to 4. We say we return at 1:45. Is 10 minutes fine?
At
1:45, 10 minutes? Or
quarter to 4.
Should it be
Yes, Chair.
10 to? 1:45 is fine.
10 to, Chair.
10 to. Okay, we'll adjourn and resume at 10 to 4.
Thank you.
We adjourn. Yes, we may proceed, Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McBride, at page 1458 is a translation of the transcript, or the transcript of the telephone conversation that we've just heard. I don't want to go into too much detail because Mr. Kuba can give original evidence as to what happened in the telephone call.
That's correct. Yes.
And if the chair is to rely on any evidence finally, it will be that of Mr. Kuba.
That's correct.
What this shows for present purposes, to place it into context and into the context of your evidence, is that on the face of it, Mr. Kuba was offered or promised a promotion if he cooperated.
He was promised restoration to the post from which he was dismissed.
In other words, a reinstatement.
That's correct.
Yes. The later transcript will deal with the offer of a promotion. Am I correct? Is that someone else?
That is another person, another recording.
All right. So for the present, the offer is that his job will be restored provided certain action is taken by him.
That's correct.
Right. To support General Ntobeza, his friend, and not to support his enemies.
That's correct.
And this will be placed into full context once we have evidence of the full sequence of interactions between Colonel Mahlangu on the one hand and Mr. Kuba on the other.
That's correct.
Okay. Then it's hearsay for the moment, but Mr. Kuba will come to testify to the extent that it may be put in dispute. But what do you say in paragraph 58?
Yeah.
In relation to a communication between General Ntobeza and Mr. Kuba?
Yeah, indeed, Mr. Kuba has attested to this in a warning statement which he signed at the time at which we were arrested and charged on the rendition matter. He spoke about this interaction with General Ntobeza in that statement.
What was that interaction? Chair, we are obtaining the warning statement. We just haven't got it yet.
Okay.
Well, he indicated that at some stage in November 2013, General Ntobeza, who was known to him through the interaction in investigations of police and who was Deputy Provincial Commissioner for Limpopo, had approached him, and the exact sequence and discussions, we'd have to look at the statement again to get it as accurately as possible. But a key element which was there, which I'm drawing attention to here, is that Ntobeza was interested in the rendition investigation in 2013 already, before I arrived at IPID. So there was an interest, and the interest was, you're holding me back in my progress in my career. And during the same period, within a matter of a few weeks at least, from documentation and evidence, Advocate Mosing also placed pressure on Kuba to finalize his report and on the rendition matter. So that's the context in which this conversation took place.
Then, Mr. McBride, from what you say, and it must be common cause, Mr. Kuba has since been restored to his position through an order of the Labour Court.
Yes, Chair, before I go there, there was a follow-up meeting almost a year later between General Ntlemeza and Mr. Kuba in
2014?
In 2014, a year later. So I'm at IPID. The minister has asked for all the information in November. This conversation is taking place just prior to General Dramat receiving his letter of notice of intention to suspend him from Minister Nhlego. So that's the context. Is General Ntlemeza. He raises his interest in where the rendition investigation is going. A year later, General Ntlemeza is also aware that something is going to happen with General Dramat and that Mr. Kuba should watch the media.
And is it your evidence that the context of the statement you make in paragraph 58 is that General Dramat's removal would facilitate General Ntlemeza's career?
Yes, Chair, and the two instances and the subject matter discussed in both conversations, there are no way to delink them. They are linked.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Kuba will come and give that evidence.
That's correct.
Mr. McBride, that you have time constraints and that, if possible, we should try and proceed with your evidence without detracting from its content too much as rapidly as possible. I was informed that during the most recent break. Am I correct?
That's correct.
In paragraph 60 through to paragraph 75.
Well, Mr. Pretorius, if the time constraints to which you refer are such that if they affect today as well as opposed to other days, I will understand if there is a request that we should not go to 4:30. I just want to check whether adding that 30 minutes might just be an unnecessary inconvenience.
Yes, I speak entirely against interest, Chair, but it may require us to go further today because the problem is tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Ms. McBride, so is your position that we should cover as much as we can today?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. Okay, no, thank you. All right.
From paragraph 60 of your statement on page 12 of Exhibit YA, you deal with what you discovered on your return in regard to what happened to senior personnel within IPID, correct?
That's correct.
And you deal with the case of Felicia Nchangasi, the case of Nomkosi Netsianda, the case of Maoka, the Director of Litigation Services, the case of Moses Dlamini, the case of Mpacho, the Director Executive Support in the Office of the Executive Director, and then you deal with restructuring, the case of Vinesh Budu, Marian Morawasi, Suziwe Kele, Lindakuli Ongo, and Mamodisha Malope, all those cases. Are you able to summarize generally what happened in this regard? The detail is there in your statement. The Chair has your statement. It's on record. What do you say about, firstly, the restructuring or transfers or dismissals generally, And secondly, the period of time over which this took place and whether this was normal or abnormal.
I think essentially the affected officials, that's now in addition to myself, Mr. Kuba and Mr. Sissoko, were all senior personnel in IPID and were in key critical positions. Mem Changase was provincial head Gauteng. And just to contrast it, Mr. Khamanyani, who was acting as executive director, was a provincial head Free State. So we have Mr. Khamanyani moving to the national office. Mr. Nchangase, I think, being suspended, or I can't remember exact sequence of events. And then we have Mem Morwaswi, who is the Chief Director Legal Services, is then moved to be provincial head in Northern Cape. The head of Northern Cape is then transferred as head of legal. The CFO, Lindo Gutle Ngongo, is transferred as head of corporate services, Gauteng. The head of supply chain management, Zuziwe Tele, is transferred to Gauteng. Mamodisha Molope, the head of stakeholder management, is transferred as provincial head in Mpumalanga. And a key one is Mem Mpago, is basically the institutional memory of the department, is in the office of the executive director, is in effect transferred to stakeholder management. Another key person who is moved is Mr. Mahoka, who is Director Litigation Services. That is, he is responsible for preparation of all documentation, including the documentation that dealt with the constitutional challenge. He's the immediate subordinate to Mem Morwaswi. So these are the circumstances where key people are moved. There's no rational or reasonable explanation why it was done. And no explanation was ever given except that it was done. And I've got orders from my principals, my supervisor, indeed, which is the minister, and I'm doing it. This is not unlike what happened in the other two institutions that I mentioned.
What effect did these transfers and this restructuring have on the viability or ability to control IPID?
I think the context of transfers and uprooting someone who's at head office, for example, to Northern Cape, besides the effect on the functionality of the department, it immediately instills fear. Immediately instills fear. Others, they have children, they're single parents, they must leave the kids and go to another province.
What happened to the person who was transferred to the Eastern Cape? Would you tell the chair about that?
That was Mr. Vinesh Budu, who was a deputy head for Gauteng. The provincial head in Gauteng after Mem Changase was suspended comes from Northern Cape, and he's a deputy in Northern Cape, and he comes to be the acting provincial head in Gauteng. And immediately you have two people of the same level both are deputy heads of respective provinces, and now the one is senior to the other. There's immediate tension between the two as to how things must be done. To fast forward, a number of the special closures are supervised by the deputy head of Northern Cape, who's now the acting head of Gauteng. And eventually, after disagreements how matters were done, Mr. Buddha was then transferred to the Eastern Cape. And he couldn't question it. He then left the department because separation from his family, he couldn't tolerate it any further. He has since reapplied for a position in IPID, and before my departure was appointed to that position. So he's back at IPID. But he is one example of those uprooted and sent somewhere else.
Over what period of time did these transfers and did this restructuring occur? Was it months, days, weeks, years?
The exact dates, I'm not sure, but this would be a period of at least 9 months.
You refer in paragraph 75 to a report of the Auditor General dated 31 March 2016. Was this a report of occurrences within IPID and the performance of IPID during the period of your suspension?
Yes, I think it covered the 15-16 period, which is a period upon also half of the year which I returned during October. But it covered a significant part of when I was absent. But if you're the head of the organization, you have to take responsibility for everything.
The report appears in Exhibit Y, small letter D, at page 1464, and there's an extract at page 1475, paragraph 27. If you could just place that on record, please.
Is that D, Chair?
D, small letter D.
1 second.
Exhibit YD, page 1464 is the first page of the Auditor General report, and the extract is at paragraph 27 of 1475. If you could just place that on record, please.
I have it, Chair.
Right, just read that onto the record, please, and comment if you will.
4 officials in top management position have also been suspended or transferred, which has compounded leadership effectiveness problems. Ethical issues in dealing with the department have also been identified, which forms part of the ongoing leadership instability. And this, it's dated 22nd of July 2016.
Is that the passage to which you wished to refer the Chair?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
You returned to office, you say in your statement at paragraph 76, on the 19th of October 2016.
That's correct, Chair.
And you requested a handover report.
That's correct.
Did you receive such a report from Mr. Khamanyani?
No, I did not. In fact, I did not see Mr. Khamanyani at work ever again, or any time since.
Your request for a report and his response are in the bundles. Do you need to refer to them?
No, not necessarily, Chair.
You say you didn't see Mr. Khamanyane at work again.
Yes.
Before your suspension, he was provincial head in the Free State, isn't it?
That's correct, Chair.
He did go back there, or you don't know?
No, Chair, he was transferred to DPCI. Usually when a person is transferred, both departments have to agree to the transfer.
Yes, and certainly the head of the organization from which he comes should
So,
be informed or should be consulted?
yes, Chair, but the transfer was effected by Minister Nhlego. So it was not done by me, it was done between Minister Nhlego and General Ntlemeza.
In the meantime, General Ntlemeza had taken General Dramat's position as head of DPCI.
I think perhaps at that stage he was already permanently appointed to that position.
Or either he was acting or he was
That's
permanently
correct.
appointed. Yeah.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. But you were not consulted, your views were not sought, and you were not asked for your consent or anything like that?
Absolutely not.
I'll come back to it if necessary. Just remind me.
If I can just add on, at a stage when the consideration of disciplinary processes against Mr. Khamanyane, it was at that time that he completed his move to DPCI. In fact, he took leave for a few weeks upon my arrival. In fact, the day before, the minister approved his leave for 2 weeks because it was known that I would come back on the 19th of October. And I think it was the Friday, I think 19th could have been a Tuesday, so it was the day before. The 18th, there's a leave form which I found, which the minister had approved his leave to be away from the office.
The communication we've just referred to, and that is Mr. Khamanyane's response to your request for a handover report, is dated the 27th of October 2016, and it appears at page 1554 of Exhibit Y, small letter D. Would you mind going there, please, and just tell the Chair very briefly if there's anything in that that you believe bears emphasis?
Page 1554, you said,
1554.
Okay.
That reply should be read in the context of your request at 1552,
That's correct, Chair.
where you said in paragraph 3, the EXCO has directed that the following aspects should be covered in your presentation.
That's correct.
What were you seeking to establish or find out about?
I had indicated there that there's some explanation on the financial transfers of the department and the department in general, financial implications of what happened. The executive committee of the department had a meeting, and as a result of that meeting, it was decided that the following information is required and that it's proper and correct to have a handover report so that decisions that were taken by the acting executive director, some rationale could be provided for them.
And there are various other matters in respect of which you requested information. Is that so?
That's correct, yes.
All right. I'm not sure that it's necessary to go into any detail, but did you receive a cooperative response? And I'm referring to page 1554.
So, in particular, I'll refer to page 1555, which basically sums up the attitude, is the end of the sentence. For the record, I accounted to whoever who appointed me to act for that particular period, and any issue, matter, and uncertainty that you are having, you are more than welcome to take to take it up with him, as he, with capital letters H, as one refers to the good Lord, he is the one who suspended you and thereafter appointed me. So that summed up the attitude.
You requested information on various operational matters,
That's correct.
and you say the response you received was, to put it mildly, not entirely helpful.
Yeah, I did not assist at all.
Can we go, please, to page 18 of Bundle YA, your statement in paragraph 77. Is it correct that Mr. Khamanyani faced disciplinary action for what occurred in IPID during his
That's correct.
period of
yes.
control? Do you know what happened to that matter?
The discipline reaction.
Yes.
It fell away because he transferred to another department.
All right. Let's go then to the next topic you deal with on page 18, and that's the infiltration of IPID by crime intelligence. You've told the chair that during the period of your suspension, 3 members of crime intelligence became employed within IPID.
That's correct, yes.
Would you like to comment in that regard?
Yeah, I noticed upon my return that there were... Thanks, Chair.
Take your time, it's in paragraph 78.
Yeah, Brigadier Tlogomo had been appointed director investigators, and he had come from crime intelligence. In effect, he was the acting head of national investigations in Mr. Sissoko's position. He returned to crime intelligence soon after my return to office. My next encounter with Khomo was in Parliament, where he was part of General Patlani's team to counter IPID's investigations. Khomo would later approach IPID investigators, Mandla Mahlangu and Cedric Ngabinde, to offer them brigadier positions to induce them to make false statements to implicate IPID managers in wrongdoing. And then I referred to a recording made by Mahlangu about his conversation or phone call with Khomo, and such an offer is made. And there's accompanying statements to those recordings made by Mr. Mahlangu. He confirms to Mahlangu, that is Khomo, that he is working with the Northwest team led by Major General Jan Mabula. It was actually not necessary to even confirm that because I had seen him in Parliament. On General Patlani's side,
Let's take that step by step because you've just given a lot of evidence in a very short period of time. The first point that you make in paragraph 78 is that Khomo and others during your suspension became employed by IPID.
that's correct.
Shortly after your return, went back to crime intelligence.
That's correct.
Was he employed on a permanent basis during your absence, or it was just a temporary arrangement?
Thanks, Chair. It was a permanent appointment at IPID.
Oh,
I want to deal with the recording. If you could go to Annexure Q, which is at page 1557. of Exhibit YD.
Just give me the page again.
It's at page 1557, Chair.
Thank you.
Again, the full import of this recording can only properly be understood when direct evidence is given as to its contents. And Mandla Mashlangu, in order to place it before the chair, would have to give direct evidence as to what occurred during the telephone conversation.
That's correct, and the context in which it occurred.
And what preceded and subsequently occurred after the conversation.
That's correct.
And as a party to the conversation, Mandla Mashlangu can also give evidence as to the circumstances under which the recording was made.
That's correct, and which the accompanying affidavit to the recording was made.
Right. It's all
In a particular criminal case investigation which was opened as a result of this.
So it's a matter of public record already, is it?
Absolutely.
Right. Just ask that it be played. Chair, this transcript shows the words in the original language used, and then the translation follows.
Yes, thank you.
Could you play it, please? Sorry, before you start playing. The transcript refers to a person by the name, or not by the name, by the title of Male, M-A-L-E. Who is that?
That is Mr. Mashlangu.
And then Male 1, who is that?
Is Brigadier Khomo.
Okay. Would you play it, please?
But it's still up. Infiltration is normal. It's more. Hello, network, no? Oh. Sunday late.
Yeah, Sunday.
Okay. But in terms of the general, now, which unit?
No, I see the directive here again.
Okay.
And I can't give that directive. Go to more, like the next talk, I do the fellow negative crime intelligence.
Okay.
No, why hate how you go to work?
So now I'll have to choose myself. No, naturally. No, whatever I can't choose. No, CI is also good. Yeah, maybe detectives.
But now for you, my preference would be CI.
Okay.
For you. I can get a close to me. Go natural, what I'm saying, like not, maybe fees.
Oh, okay.
Close to me.
Okay.
Not necessarily put it directly, I can put someone else.
Okay.
But people want to put them on now, so forth. So, just to feel at home.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
That were very, very easy.
Okay.
Very
Okay.
easy that way. So detective, you not so detective.
So detective, you don't prefer it. It's nonsense.
Get ready to go with someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get go see I never get to get it up.
Okay.
I get work at intelligence.
Okay.
Look at the time of geese.
Oh.
What a project. I get a secret project driven. A project, then Iraq.
Be detective.
Mote kama focus mote ngrali prosecutor mote rali send that and that ona tele nguru wena ka wena la ka wena lo go bontsha tshisa la mabane ke bus grade o go so information through information ka then we organize o ke ma focus ana go plugging ana yo
But then the problem will be, for example, I'm just giving example. If General Store said no, I'm giving you, for example, brigadier post, and you're a brigadier, so it means I won't work with you.
ne au file ka for brigadier post o ya go una le section una ke section head ka
Okay.
anyway
Okay.
if we have crime intelligence we have crime intelligence I don't want to move against the section head I brigadier section head
Okay.
what section where run again.
Yeah, but I don't have experience. That's the problem. So it means colonel.
Section commander.
Oh. So you'll prefer for I become a colonel than a brigadier.
Brigadier is like suicide. Set for failure.
Oh, it's like committing suicide. Okay.
Yeah, so early colonel. Colonel I agree with a team leader.
Yeah.
Yes, a sort of assistant director of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I go over team leader again at 12, level 12.
Level 12.
Yeah, we should say.
Okay.
The lieutenant generals in other junior members again.
But then maybe, Bagasi view it as like some favors or corruption or something like that. They won't view it like that. IPID, I get IPID maybe will investigate where am I going.
No, that's not corruption. That's nothing to do with corruption.
Okay.
I can go up to resign to IPID. I can resign to IPID.
Yeah, I resign. Okay.
If they don't want to follow it properly, they will fail this money most of the things.
All right.
And I can remember now, you are with us now, when we are saying this fellow is going down. And
oh, he's going down.
There will be no one who will be doing this dirty job again. There will be no one.
All right. Why would ED be going down? Because of? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
No, I'm a suspect. I don't want to go for to testify.
Okay.
So,
yeah, but like for example, all those questions that I received, I know nothing about them. Or one I'm going to be a useless tool for.
Those questions, whether you know them or don't know them, they're relevant because like for instance,
okay. Hey, Oscar, hijack. Don't stop, just drive. Oh, okay. Okay. Yes, yeah.
But then it became sort of an integral part, IP. That is truth. It's the truth. It became ya ba wore so do ngat aso ngar member ya IPID you understand?
Okay.
It's through him. It's through an idiot. And I'm just saying, the Tretela, the what I'm camera, I'm carrying 10 or 11 churches, the one.
Who, ED?
And then what I did, what about 10 or 11?
ED, 10 charges? Or 11?
Yes. 10 or 11. Could get a number two, number one, he's in Paul.
Paul number one, then ED number two. Okay.
Yeah, when I leave 18 or 19 cases, Paul. I get another most of the thing, then we can, what was a trend, then you are self actor, you are number 4 or in terms of the numbers and cases.
I was accused number 3.
You're number 3.
I was accused number 3, yeah. But then I get you guys are going to add more accused. Hello?
By 7, by 7, I get
7. So it will be accused number 1 to 7. Yeah, I can hear you.
D7, D7.
Okay.
Now you are 7.
What about?
It's good.
But I hear you guys.
What about?
I hear you guys. Yesterday you said earlier you said you're going to include Mr. Sissoko. Is he there as well? In Cuba?
It's not there.
Okay.
Era na saboli too much. Gora ana tute adi roommating adra ex ya ita. Mara na ki member ya that security was up ira defu.
Okay.
But there's nothing wrong ya really that's far.
All right.
Mara ira kira jela mala ren gaida plan la recreate that laptop ka. Ugara rogra things you learn how to do real again.
Oh, okay.
But as of now, no, I had to suspect. Our innocent this year, but it is a two one at another one.
Oh, yeah. So the other say it means we're talking me, the ED, Paul O'Sullivan, Gavinde, Binang, Trent. Okay. So the new ones you don't put them. Like Bobo Kuba.
What they have.
Okay.
So it will be wrong. I grow saying something like that. But how I know the truth for it. Look at tomorrow. They're not the same one. The mama. That's why I that read 1, 2, 3. The mama looking like that.
Oh, okay.
I get more than that. I'm talking about again. I got deliberation. Now the bar, but I'm going to appeal. About true. It is a refer what I distraction directly.
Okay. Sure.
So I don't know now. If we didn't anything you shouldn't come now, we Baba Holoba. Now you come up with your name, I shouldn't hear Mama. Then I ran to so. That is just we had a meeting. Narabatarne, redirect, the Lumo Lena Pesara Filorne.
Hello? Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I go when I was so serious.
Okay. Okay. No, it's fine then, Mara. Yeah, no, I'll go through all those questions and see if I know something then and come back to you. Hello?
Is that the end?
No, it continues, I'm told.
The technicians are looking at you.
Hello? Oh, network. Kirki network.
Can I have yeah. Ke nahana bjalo, ke nahana ke network.
Okay. No, it's fine. We'll talk some other time then.
Ke re ka bolela wa re Sontaga ha o seme bang. Late afternoon.
Yeah, Sunday I might have time.
Late afternoon.
Yeah.
So re ta bona ka ntho ka nako ya gona ke re.
Oh, okay, no problem. Oh, no problem, no problem. Thank you, Ara.
Thank you. Once again, we will check the translation, Chair.
Yes.
For the moment, just to place on record that there will be independent evidence in regard to this conversation, including a participant in the conversation.
Yes.
I say that provisionally because I don't have the final agreement, but we will endeavour to place it before you, Chair.
Yes.
The second point, perhaps this should be dealt with by you, Mr. McBride. The telephone conversation appears to have taken place on the 21st of June 2018. That's sometime after your return to IPID, after your suspension. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Right. At that time,
I think he's just looking for something before you.
Yeah, Chair, I'm not. I'm back on my.
You're trying to look for something that will
My
help you with
statement,
the
yeah.
timing.
Remind. I think on the. We need to just double check the date on which it happened, in particular the year. If my memory is right, it was in 2018. It could have been 2017, as this was one continuous process. I'll have to double check on that in terms of sequence of events. Yeah, I don't have independent recollection now.
well, the heading to the recording says 21 June 2018. I presume that can be independently checked by our investigators.
Yeah, but my only concern is perhaps the day on which the transcription was made. I'm not really.
That may also be correct.
Because there are a number of errors in the transcription. For example, reference to Mr. Sissoko is reflected as.
Yes, so we'll come to that.
Yeah.
You say this could have happened in 2017.
Yeah.
In any event, what position did you occupy at the time,
I was the executive director of IPID.
after your return from suspension?
That's correct.
Mr. Mahlangu, what position did he occupy at the time
He was a principal investigator.
with IPID?
Yes. He was handling a number of sensitive investigations.
When you say sensitive investigations, can you name one or two?
Well, the obvious one, and for this particular discussion and what I've testified to a little bit earlier, it was the investigation into General Patlani.
All right,
Initially, Mr. Mahlangu was the head investigator.
right. And Mr. Khomo, what position did he occupy at the time?
He was a brigadier in crime intelligence.
Had he gone back to crime intelligence by
At the
this
time of, yes, that's correct, Chair. At the time of him making that phone call, he was in crime intelligence.
So what we have here is a conversation between a senior officer in crime intelligence and an investigator in IPID, Mr. Mahlangu. Mr. Mahlangu was at the time engaged in a number of sensitive investigations involving members of the South African Police Service,
That's correct.
including General Patlani.
That's correct.
And sensitive in this context has a lot to do with the positions in government or society of the persons who were affected by the investigations.
Chair, that is
Part of it,
part of the considerations.
yes. The other part was exactly what was being investigated.
Absolutely, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Firstly, from what you have testified about the independence of IPID, regardless of the detail, should a conversation of this type ever have taken place between a senior official in crime intelligence and an investigator in IPID?
Chair, if the context is, even if the context is not given in this conversation, the contents are improper, as there's clearly offers of a job. In fact, jobs are just offered out.
Yes, we know that. But my point, we'll get to the content in a moment. My point is that this is a senior officer in crime intelligence talking about job offers to a person in IPID who is doing investigations into members of the police force.
I think, Mr. Pretorius, your question was such that I think he had to think whether the conversation, irrespective of who it was between, whether it was proper or not. So his answer that at whatever level it was improper maybe should be understood in that context.
Yes, I'm just dealing with a different point apart from the content, and that is that this is crime intelligence talking to IPID.
Chair, to answer that in its fullest is that it cannot be purely improper for a conversation to be held with two former colleagues, if I can put it in that way. The context here is that they're discussing investigations, and that at that stage, Brigadier Khomo was in charge of internal security, nothing to do with anti-corruption stuff, and that's why his appearance in 2017, 16th of May at Parliament, with General Patlani and his team, was already problematic. There's clearly the investigation, aspects of the statement say, well, and subject to confirmation. We don't want to do detective work because detective work is busy wasting time chasing criminals. There's a kind of orientation here which is, for me, is disturbing.
Let's go to the content then,
Yeah.
and I'll return to the question later. It appears that at page 1558 and following, and in summary, the discussion takes place, and it may even be termed an offer on closer examination of a post for Mr. Mashlangu. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And on page 1560, the rank is discussed. First brigadier, then colonel.
That's correct.
Now, in relation to the post occupied at the time by Mr. Mashlangu, would this have been a promotion? Would it have been a transfer at the same level? of seniority? What is the position?
So it represents a promotion, quite a substantial one, exceeding a few levels and jumping a few levels.
So we know then that the two in the conversation are discussing a substantial promotion and a transfer. If we can go then to page 1561, Mr. Mashlangu says, but look, isn't this favoritism or corruption of some sort? Will it not be viewed like that? And the answer is no, that's nothing to do with corruption. You resign an IPID and then you work where you like.
I mean, I think
you don't need to comment. The
Okay.
validity of such a statement is apparent on the face of it, or its lack of validity. But what I'd like to do is ask you about what you know of the conversation at the bottom of page 1561. In other words, on the one hand, there's talk of a transfer or a termination of employment and re-employment at a much more senior level. That's what we've established so far.
that's correct.
But at the bottom of page 1561, the translation reads, remember here, you are with us now, and we discuss the things that, well, where your service fellow is going down. What is being said there?
The context is given on page 1562 and exactly what it means. It came over on the recording. Yeah, it's stated in fourth line as indistinct. So Mr. Matlango asks Brigadier Homo, why would and what is indistinct is ED be going down? Because of what?
Who is ED?
ED was me, I was executive director.
So ED was basically E for executive, D for director.
That's correct. It's
Yeah.
a reference to me.
Yeah.
Then in the context, firstly, of what appears on the face of it at least to be an offer of a senior position in crime intelligence. Secondly, in the context of a conversation where the executive director, that is you, is, quote, going down, unquote. Evidence is then discussed in the middle of page 1562, where Mr. Mashlangu says, all those questions I received, I know nothing about them, you see, I'm going to be a useless 204. And then the response from Brigadier Homo is, no, those questions, whether we know them or we don't know them, is irrelevant. What is, if you could just give some explanation of that in the context of what you know.
The key issues that they're discussing, section 204, like the line before that says section 4, but
That's 204 of the Criminal Procedure Act.
yeah, it's when an accomplice witness testifies against his co-perpetrators, as it were. Now, what has been offered and what has been explained is that by Homos, you'll be there in 204, and Matlango is saying, I'll be a useless 204 because I don't know anything about those questions that were posed to me. Referring to some previous occasion, which they can explain directly what it is. And Homo's position is, regardless of whether you know about the questions or not, and so then the subject is changed about where he's driving, but The issue is, regardless of whether you know or not, you will get promoted, and obviously the other witness, Mr. Mahlangu, would have to give context to that directly, what it meant or what it could only have meant, or whether it could mean anything else. Maybe there's an innocent explanation for it.
For the moment, what needs to be explained is a conversation between a senior officer in crime intelligence speaking to an investigator in IPID who is investigating a number of sensitive cases. An offer of employment at a level far more senior than that being held at the time by Mr. Mahlangu. You, the executive director, quote, going down, unquote. Evidence to be given in a case where you are to be an accused and he is to be presumably an accomplice. That appears on the face of it to be the case.
Well, Chair, there was an attempt to do that when the Mabula team actually charged, and I'm sure we'll get that to it later, Paul O'Sullivan, Sarah Trent, Binang, one of the lead investigators, and Mr. Mahlangu.
And yourself?
No, I was not charged.
Weren't you charged with entering premises?
No, I was not there at all. I think when we consulted, I covered
in
that.
The counter-investigation?
No, I was not there on the scene where they were charged. And what he's discussing is this strategy to now include me also, because now I'm going down. As the charge from entering premises evolves and snowballs and miraculously becomes racketeering later on.
But you were the subject matter of that charge at a stage?
No, I was not. Well,
then I misunderstood what you have told me previously, but we'll get there.
Yes.
The people involved seem to be those referred to at the top of page 1565. Is that correct?
Before you proceed, Mr. Pretorius, Mr. McBride, a few minutes ago, I wanted to ask you whether you're still comfortable. Are you still okay?
Yes, Chair, I'm good.
Okay, all right, thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Pretorius.
Page 1565. Well, let's go to 1564 before we get to 1565. 1564, Mr. Khomo says, yesterday you said you are going to, sorry, not Mr. Khomo, Mr. Mahlangu says, yesterday you said you are going to include, it reads Mr. Tsotsobi, but I think we all heard it's not him, it's Mr. Sissoko, is that correct?
That's right.
And then at the bottom of the page, Mr. Mahlangu, is that Mr. Khomo says, but there isn't anything wrong he did thus far. But if we can find a way, like we discussed that day, like finding that laptop, we could find the case that he committed. What is the context there?
I'm not sure whose laptop they're looking for. I assume it's Mr. Sissoko's in the context of the discussion.
But what is being discussed here is the context of the promotion, you going down, is the fact that one of the persons to be added to the list, they don't have anything against him thus far, but they're looking for a way of finding a case against him. Am I correct?
Chair, let me answer this question because it needs a proper answer. Not that, and I should be less reticent to just say it as it is. All of this is a ruse to start a sham investigation against IPID to scupper the Patlani investigation. That's what all of this is about. This is a plan hatched how to counter IPID's investigation. That, in essence, that is it. It's nothing else. They can come and explain, maybe they have an innocent explanation. In the context of what took place in litigation between ourselves as IPID and the Patlani team and Mabule team, who were in any case our suspects, and the two judgments of Prinsloo and Tuchten forbids this counter-investigation to take place.
I understand that, but perhaps what we should do is deal with your evidence on the counter-investigation first.
Yes.
Then this will make sense.
Yes.
But for the moment, it appears on the face of it that this conversation is talking about a potential case against 7 accused.
That's correct.
Included is in this conversation is the prospect of joining Mr. Sissoko as one of the accused. Correct.
That's correct, yes.
At the bottom of the page, there appears to be a statement, but there isn't anything wrong he's done, but we can find something wrong. Do you see that?
Yes. And also in the middle of the page, when Homo speaks about, or Mr. Mahlangu speaks about Mr. Sissoko, he says, yesterday you guys said you're going to include Mr. Sissoko and as well, and Kuba. So it's a context in which that that comment or response by Homo at the bottom, which you just referred to, is said.
Well, Kuba is mentioned over the page. It's spelled K-H-U-W-A, but I think it should refer to Kuba, not Kuwa. Do you see that?
Yes, Chair, I'm on page 1564 in the middle.
Yes, but Kuba is mentioned on 1565.
That's
not on 1564. Where?
Yeah. On 1564 is mentioned.
Kuwa.
Oh, I
it
see
must
that.
be Kuba
yes.
on
So,
1564 in
so
the middle.
Sobi, who is Sissoko, and Kuwa, who is Kuba. Yes, I see that. Is that the one you're referring to?
And the importance of that, Chair, is that yesterday, you guys, meaning Homo, arbitrarily added Mr. Sissoko and Mr. Kuba to the suspects. And and then Homo says, no, isn't there? But clearly there's been some discussion in the yesterday, which Mahlangu must give context to. But that's the context in which it is here.
Right. And there's the question of finding evidence at the bottom of page 1564.
If I
It
can
says,
just,
but if we can find a way, like we discussed that day, like finding a laptop, we could find the case that he committed.
Chair, just in terms of, this is not unlike the hullabaloo about the rendition.
Now, I understand. I'm
Yeah.
just dealing with what's said in the transcript
yes.
for the moment, rather than commenting too widely on it. It's clear what is being said here. Correct.
Yes, that's
The
correct.
last question I'd like to deal with you for today, and then we can come back to this refreshed tomorrow. At the top of the page, mail, that is, Mr. Mahlangu says, oh, okay, oh, yeah. The others, it means it is me, the ED, Paul, and then it's indistinct, and Kabindi, Binang, and Prince. Now, unfortunately, we're dealing with this conversation before we deal with the counter-investigation, which will explain all this, but who are all those people?
The only person I'm not sure is Prince, who they were referring to. And I can't work out, even when I heard the recording, who Prince is. So I'm not sure who that is. But
what is the name of the secretary of Paul O'Sullivan?
Trent.
All right. So she was also part of.
She was charged initially with Mahlangu and Binang and O'Sullivan.
Okay. So the people here, and we'll give context to this later, who are they?
Yes. So Mr. Nkabinde is a person who was also approached at some stage to change his evidence, and when he refused to own up to it, he was kicked off the task team. Just going through it quickly, and then made complaints to the present Minister of Police after being kicked off the task team. And then Binang was one of the initial accused of the counter investigation, which was conducted by General Mabula and his team. In fact, it becomes even worse. Binang, and it was the subject of Tuchten judgment, Binang was investigating General Mabula and his team for a range of tortures, spanning, some of the tortures date back to 2006, 2010, and some of the team of General Mabula appeared in court in 2012.
Let's not go into the detail. We're coming there, I promise. Just the people. That's Mshlangu, the ED, who's yourself.
Yeah.
Paul, I presume, is Paul O'Sullivan.
Yeah.
And Kabindi, Binang, and Prince. We
Yes.
don't know who Prince is. Now, just to foreshadow what you will tell the chair tomorrow, is that IPID officials were investigating a number of police officials.
That's correct.
In response to that investigation, there was what you will refer to as a counter-investigation.
That's correct.
You will say, as I understand it, on spurious grounds, a whole investigation was conducted as a response, and that went to court and was the subject matter of a judgment by His Lordship Mr. Justice Tuchten, which we will deal with tomorrow.
That's right.
Is it an appropriate time, Chair? I think we all need a break.
Yes, we can take can adjourn for the day. So tomorrow at 9:30, I'll deliver my decision in Mr. Tomweane's application for leave to cross-examine. I won't just hand down, I will read the decision. So that might take maybe 45 minutes. I previously said we would start at 9:30. So I think that certainly in terms of resuming the evidence of Mr. McBride, I don't think we would resume it before 10. So I think, Mr. McBride, you don't need to be here before 10.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. And then once we have finished delivering the decision, then we might take a break and then resume immediately. So we'll adjourn until tomorrow. So with the evidence, it will be after the delivery of the decision in the other matter, in the application. But otherwise, the delivery of the decision in that application will be at 9:30. We adjourn.